Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling the Insidious franchise, which I know a lot of you have been asking about. And I have to admit, I'm pretty excited about this one too. I mean, who doesn't love a good scare every now and then?
It's interesting because Insidious isn't just about those jump scares and creepy demons. I mean, it definitely has those, don't get me wrong, but it goes deeper.
Right, it really gets under your skin.
Exactly. It explores fear, anxieties, past traumas. It makes you think about the things that go bump in the night and how they're connected to our own personal fears.
Definitely. It makes you think twice about turning off the lights, that's for sure. So, to get everyone on the same page, the Insidious franchise has 5 films. The first one, simply titled Insidious, came out back in 2010. This is where we meet the Lambert family, whose son Dalton suddenly falls into a coma.
Classic horror movie setup, right?
Totally. But of course, there's a twist. It turns out Dalton's coma isn't just some medical mystery. He's actually become a beacon for all sorts of nasty spirits lurking in this terrifying place called the Further. Have you ever wondered what the Further actually is?
Well, the films describe the further as a kind of in-between space. It's foggy, ominous, and full of these lost souls and malevolent entities. It's definitely not your typical haunted house, that's for sure.
It's a nightmare realm, and anyone can get trapped there. Okay, so after the first Insidious, we get Insidious, Chapter 2, which picks up right where the first one left off. The Lambert family is, understandably, still reeling from their encounter with the Further.
Oh yeah, I can't even imagine what they're going through.
But in Chapter 2, we get to delve deeper into Josh Lambert's past, the dad. And we see how his past connects to all this supernatural chaos. Why do you think the filmmakers decided to focus on Josh's past in this way?
I think it introduces this really interesting idea that trauma, especially childhood trauma, can make you more susceptible to dark forces. It's not just about those external ghosts and demons, but also about the internal scars that we carry with us.
Right, and that makes it so much more relatable, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It adds this psychological layer to the horror, making the stakes so much higher.
It's not just about surviving a haunting, it's about confronting your own inner demons. Now, things take a bit of a turn with Insidious, Chapter 3. What happens in Chapter 3?
Chapter 3 is a prequel. We shift back in time and focus on Elise Rainier before she ever met the Lamberts. We're introduced to a teenager named Quinn, who does what so many horror movie characters do. She messes with a Ouija board.
Oh, no, the Ouija board. Never a good idea.
Right. And of course things go wrong. She accidentally opens a door to the Further, attracting some very unwanted attention. There's this terrifying entity known as the Man Who Can't Breathe that really freaks her out.
I remember that one. Super creepy.
Yeah,
But Chapter 3 isn't just about scares, is it? We also learn a lot more about Elise's past.
exactly. We see her in her early days as a psychic medium. At first, she's really reluctant to use her abilities. She's dealing with her own personal demons.
I guess that makes sense. I mean, who would want to face those kinds of things?
Right. But eventually, she confronts this evil to protect Quinn. It's really powerful watching her develop as a character.
It's like we're seeing her origin story, how she became the strong and fearless ghost hunter we know and love.
Exactly. She finds her strength and purpose even though she's terrified. Then, Insidious. The Last Key, another prequel, takes us even further into Elise's past.
Even deeper into the Further.
You could say that. We learn about her difficult childhood, her connection to the creepy key-face entity, and how she first started navigating the Further. It's like each film peels back another layer, revealing more about her and the spirit world.
So it's more than just backstory, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. I think it really fleshes out her character. We see that she's more than just a Ghostbuster. She's got this complex and tragic past, and she uses her gifts, her abilities to help others. You see these themes of facing your fears and finding redemption. Really powerful stuff.
It's like her story is intertwined with the Further itself. And then we finally get to the last chapter, Insidious, The Red Door. This film brings us back to the Lamberts, 10 years after the first 2 films.
So Dalton's all grown up now.
He is. He's heading off to college, but of course, the Further hasn't forgotten about them. It seems like the past always comes back to haunt you, even in the world of Insidious.
You can't escape your demons, can you?
It seems not. This film really acts as a conclusion to the Lambert family saga. It forces them to confront their lingering trauma and repressed memories. It's like they have to go through it all again to finally find some kind of peace.
It's a story about breaking the cycle of fear and finding closure. Do you think facing those past experiences, those traumas, can actually set you free?
That's a great question. And it really highlights how Insidious goes beyond typical horror movie tropes. It gets into these deeper issues like family, trauma, the things that haunt us all. But okay, let's talk about the horror. Let's talk about those signature elements that make this franchise so effectively scary. Those jump scares, for example, they always get me.
Oh, they're masters of the jump scare. Remember that scene with the red-faced demon in the first film?
Oh, how could I forget?
That one's iconic. The way they build the tension and then bam, it's burned into your memory. I bet you still think about it sometimes.
More than I care to admit. For weeks after I saw that movie, I couldn't look at a dark corner without imagining him lurking there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just the jump scares, right? Insidious also has some really memorable villains. The lipstick face demon, the bride in black, key face. Each one is visually disturbing and seems to embody a specific fear.
I think the visuals are key to their effectiveness. They tap into our primal fears. They're not easy to forget. The lipstick-faced demon, for example, with its distorted features and creepy grin, it could be seen as a representation of how trauma can twist your perception of reality.
Wow. Never thought about it that way. It's like the villains are more than just monsters. They're reflections of our own anxieties and fears.
Exactly. And then there's the music, right? Joseph Bishara's score just adds so much to the atmosphere. It's so unsettling. It's like nails on a chalkboard, but in a good way.
It's become a signature of the franchise. You hear those dissonant strings, and you know something creepy is about to happen. But did you know that Leigh Whannell, who plays Specs in the films, is also the writer?
Wait, really? I didn't know that. So he's both the comic relief and the mastermind behind all the scares. That's amazing.
It is. I wonder if his acting experience influences his writing at all.
I'm sure it does. Specs adds some much-needed levity to these intense films. And that's important for pacing and audience engagement. But Whannell's writing also shows a real understanding as how to build a layered story. There are these recurring motifs and callbacks between the films that you might miss the first time around.
I love that. It rewards those who pay attention. It's like a puzzle box, slowly revealing its secrets.
Exactly. And speaking of secrets, did you know that the franchise has grossed over $540 million worldwide on a relatively small budget? That's incredible.
That's the power of a good scare, right? But it's not just about the scares, is it? There's something else that sets Insidious apart. It's that emotional core, the way we connect with the characters and their struggles, especially with Elise.
Oh, absolutely. The way she evolves from a reluctant medium to a courageous hero. She even gets her own prequels, even though she dies in the first film. You don't see that very often in horror.
I know. It's like she became the heart of the franchise. And Lin Shaye's performance is just amazing. She embodies those themes of sacrifice and redemption, facing her own fears to help others. And honestly, who doesn't love a strong female character who can kick some serious spectral butt?
It's a breath of fresh air, right? Compared to the typical damsel in distress. Elise's journey is all about empowerment and resilience. I think it resonates with audiences, especially women, who are often looking for characters they can identify with.
Absolutely. So what do you think is it about Elise that makes her so captivating?
I think it's a combination of things. Lin Shaye brings this warmth and vulnerability to the role that makes Elise instantly likable. She's not just a fearless ghost hunter. She's a complex woman with a past. She's relatable and human, even when she's dealing with these supernatural forces.
You're right. She feels like a real person. And the prequels, they really dig into her past and how it shaped her. It's inspiring to watch her overcome her own demons, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. It's that combination of strength, compassion, and vulnerability. She's not afraid to be scared, but she doesn't let fear control her. She uses her experiences to help others. That's what makes her a true hero.
You've really hit the nail on the head there. It's not just about her powers, it's about her heart and her willingness to use her gifts to do good.
Exactly. She teaches us to face our fears and use our experiences to make a positive impact on the world. That's a pretty powerful message, especially for a horror film. But it makes me think, if our own minds can be haunted by our past, can we ever truly escape our personal further? What do you think?
Ooh, that's a deep question. I think that's a conversation for another time, don't you? We've covered a lot of ground already.
You're right. We need to give our listeners a break before we delve back into the further.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these different elements of the Insidious films, but there's one that always sticks out to me as super unique, and that's the concept of astral projection. I mean, it's not just about ghosts haunting a house, it's about the potential of the human mind to travel into the spirit world. What do you find most fascinating about astral projection in Insidious?
It adds this whole other layer to the story, right? It allows certain characters, like Dalton and Elise, to actually confront these entities face to face. But at the same time, it makes them incredibly vulnerable because their physical bodies are left defenseless. Would you ever want to try astral projection, knowing the risks?
I have to admit, it's a terrifying thought. Like, part of me is super intrigued by the idea of exploring this hidden world, confronting those entities head on. But leaving my physical body behind, I don't know if I could handle that kind of fear. What about you?
That's the thing about Insidious, isn't it? It plays on that idea of being lost, both literally and figuratively. The characters are lost in their grief, their trauma, their fear, and the further becomes a manifestation of that lostness. It's like they have to confront their deepest anxieties in order to find their way back.
It's like the further isn't just a place, it's a reflection of what's going on inside the characters. So are you saying the further is like a metaphor for the dark parts of our own minds, the parts we try to hide?
Exactly. It's those hidden traumas, those suppressed fears, the parts of ourselves that we try to bury deep down.
So to escape, we have to face those inner demons, those hidden traumas that are holding us back.
That's what makes Insidious more than just a scary movie. It becomes this psychological exploration of fear and the importance of confronting our own darkness. Makes you think about the things you might be trying to avoid, doesn't it?
You're so right. It makes you think about your own personal further, those inner demons that we all have to grapple with. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about the films, the characters, the scares, the deeper themes. But what about the overall legacy of Insidious? Where does it stand in the horror genre?
Well, we know it's been a huge financial success, which tells us that people are really drawn to this kind of intelligent layer horror. But I think it's had a significant cultural impact, too, especially in how we view supernatural horror in film. It seems like Insidious inspired so many other films that try to blend those jump scares with deeper, more meaningful themes.
I see that. It's like it opened the door for horror to be more than just gore and cheap thrills. I feel like it really helped pave the way for films that explore the psychological aspects of fear, the complexities of family, the power of the human spirit to overcome those dark forces. And you can't deny the influence of James Wan, the director. He's become a major force in horror with films like The Conjuring.
Absolutely. And Leigh Whannell, the writer. He's had a successful career as a director, too. They really created something special with Insidious, a franchise that's both terrifying and thought-provoking. You know those movies that stay with you long after they're over? Insidious is definitely one of those.
Oh, totally. Especially with horror, the good ones get under your skin. They make you question things, make you see the world a little differently. And yeah, Insidious definitely has that effect. It's like it plants the seed of unease, and then you find yourself looking over your shoulder even when you know there's nothing there.
You've hit it right on the head. It's that feeling, that lingering sense of unease, that awareness of the darkness that might be lurking beneath the surface. It reminds us that the world isn't always as safe and predictable as we like to think. And that's powerful.
But it's not just about being scared, is it? Insidious also makes you think about the things that scare you personally, the things you might be hiding from, even from yourself.
Exactly, and that's the real horror, isn't it? Sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters in the shadows, but the darkness we carry within ourselves. I think that's something we can all relate to on some level.
I think you're right. It's like Insidious is holding up a mirror to our deepest fears and anxieties. Maybe we should pause here for a moment and let our listeners process everything we've talked about so far. We've covered a lot. All right, I'm back.
So we've talked about the Insidious films, the characters, those iconic scares, and even the deeper psychological themes that make this franchise so compelling. But now I'm wondering, where does Insidious go from here? I mean, the Red Door felt like a pretty satisfying conclusion to the Lambert family story. But do you think there's potential for more stories in this universe?
And that's what I love about franchises like this. There's always the potential for more. We could have another prequel, exploring Lisa's earlier days as a medium. Or maybe we could delve into the backstories of Specs and Tucker. I bet they have some interesting stories to tell. I would love to learn more about them. But what about exploring a completely different family's experience with the further? That could be really interesting.
That's a great idea. Introduce some fresh perspectives and expand the whole mythology. There are so many possibilities. What kind of story would you like to see in a future Insidious film?
That's a tough one. There are so many directions they could go. Personally, I'd love to see more of the further itself. We've gotten glimpses of it, but I feel like there's so much more to uncover. Like, what are its origins? What are the rules? We know it's full of terrifying creatures, but where do they come from?
You're right. There's a lot of untapped potential there. I mean, The Further is such a unique and terrifying concept. Audiences would eat that up.
Totally. It's like a whole other world with its own laws of physics, its own hierarchy of power. I think it would be really interesting to see how different people react to being trapped there. What are the specific challenges they would face? How do they try to survive?
Oh, for sure. And what about the long-term effects? We've seen how The Further can mess with your perceptions, amplify your fears, but what happens after prolonged exposure? Can you ever really come back from that?
You're right. There are so many psychological implications to consider. It's like the further is a nightmarish reflection of our own subconscious. It could be a really interesting way to explore things like trauma, identity, and even the nature of reality itself.
So many possibilities. And with how successful Insidious has been, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more films exploring those very ideas in the future. But for now, I think we've done a pretty deep dive into this spooky and fascinating world, wouldn't you say?
I think so too. We've explored the films, the characters, those iconic scares, and the deeper themes that make Insidious so much more than just a horror movie.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Hopefully our listeners now have a new appreciation for the Insidious franchise and all it has to offer.
absolutely. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final question to ponder. We've talked about how Insidious uses the further to represent those internal struggles we all face. So if our minds can be haunted by the past, can we ever truly escape our personal further? What do you think?
That's such a great question. Something to really think about as you go about your day, as you face your own challenges and anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that haunt you? How can you confront them, overcome them, and ultimately find your way back to yourself?
Those are powerful questions, and they get to the heart of what makes Insidious so thought-provoking. It's not just about entertainment, it's about exploring the depths of human experience, the darkness and the light, the fears and the hopes, the things that make us who we are.
Well said. And on that note, we want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Insidious. We hope you enjoyed exploring this terrifying but also thought-provoking world with us. Until next time, remember to keep the lights on and be careful what doors you open. You never know what might be waiting on the other side.